This is Dominissimo Voxlore, transmitting from the shadowed edge of the Eye of Terror, through warp-ridden channels where the Imperium's light dares not reach. In this broadcast, we follow the path of Ezekiel Abaddon, the first captain of the Lunar Wolves, heir to Horus, breaker of legions, and architect of the Long War. From the blood-slicked tunnels of Cthonia to the madness of Dathin, from the burning walls of Terror to the war-torn birth of the Black Legion, from the First Black Crusade to the fall of Cadia itself. This is the chronicle of the Imperium's greatest nemesis. Strike the seal of subscription before Abaddon marks you as the next casualty of the Long War. Brace yourself, Initiate, to steel your mind against the whispers of demons and the roar of traitor guns. This is the voice of Dominissimo, and this is the lore of Abaddon the Despoiler. Ezekiel Abaddon's story does not begin with war, demon blades, or the cataclysmic ambitions that would one day shake the galaxy. It begins instead in the hollowed out tunnels of Cthonia, a world already dying long before Abaddon ever drew breath. Cthonia was a planet stripped to bone and ash, a mining world carved out by ancient industry, where life had returned only in the form of violent gangs, predatory packs, and law that existed only at the edge of a blade. It was a world that forged killers by necessity, and kings by force. And it was here that Ezekiel Abaddon, firstborn of the warlord Tarkaradon, opened his eyes to a life that expected him to kneel. He never would. From a young age, Ezekiel grew into a figure larger than the violent labyrinth that surrounded him. Chthonia's culture demanded fealty to its gang kings, rituals of obedience, coming-of-age rites soaked in blood. But when the day came that young Abaddon was expected to lower his head before his father and accept the path laid out for him, he refused with a coldness that shocked even hardened killers. Instead of submission, he drew a blade. Instead of obedience, he unleashed violence. In a single brutal moment, and cut through his elite guard, proving not only his strength but his total rejection of the destiny others had crafted for him. It was not ambition, not cruelty, and not a lust for power that guided him in that moment. It was defiance, raw and absolute, a refusal to live by anyone's will but his own, a truth that would define everything he became. The tunnels of Cthonia did not forgive mercy, and they had no reward for the weak. Word of the warlord's death spread, and Ezekiel became a target. Other gangs saw opportunity in his young age. Rivals plotted to seize control. Assassins stalked him into the dimly lit vents and hollow corridors. And in those days that followed, Abaddon's legend began to form, not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. Some stories say that a dozen killers caught him alone in the dark. Others say they ambushed him while he slept. However many came for him, none survived. Ezekiel fought like a force of nature, unyielding and unstoppable, carving through his attackers with a skill and fury unnatural for one so young. His unmatched feats of endurance, strength, and will caught the attention of a very different kind of warlord, the 16th Legion. When the Lunar Wolves came to Cthonia, scouring the criminal nest for recruits to join the Great Crusade, they found in Ezekiel not just talent, but destiny. Horus Lupercal himself took note. The Primarch of the 16th Legion had an eye for warriors who could rise above mortality, and in the fierce, unbroken gaze of this Chthonian youth, he saw something exceptional. He personally approved Ezekiel's induction into the Legion, a rare honour even in the days of the Great Crusade. For Abaddon, being brought to the Lunar Wolves was more than recruitment. It was a stripping away of a world that had made him. He was taken from the tunnels, transported to Luna, and subjected to the agonies of Astartes' transformation. Bones shattered and reformed, organs rewired, muscles torn and rebuilt into something far beyond human limits. Many failed such trials, but Ezekiel survived, as he always had, meeting the process not with obedience but with the same iron will that had led him to carve his own fate on Cthonia. And when he emerged, armoured in the pale plate of the 16th Legion, he did so under a new oath. Not to the Emperor, not to an ideology, but to Horus. It is said that the Primarch gifted him a coin as a token of personal recognition. Not a trinket, not a symbol of payment, but a reminder that Horus had noticed him, chosen him, and elevated him. Whether this moment meant gratitude, loyalty, or something deeper to Abaddon, none can say. But what is certain is that his relationship with Horus became the foundation on which the rest of his life would be built. The Primarch became his father that Cthonia had failed to give him. The Warmaster became the guiding star he would follow into glory, and eventually into damnation. Within the Legion, Ezekiel's rise was immediate and meteoric. As a neophyte, he showed not only unmatched physical power, but an instinctive sense for leadership and battle. His aggression, honed in Chthonia's deadly tunnels, translated seamlessly onto alien battlefields. He fought with a discipline few expected from someone raised among gangs, yet with a ferocity that few Astartes could match. Every campaign added another legend to his name. Every battle reinforced that Abaddon was not simply another Space Marine. He was a weapon waiting for its purpose. He did not seek political favour. He did not court alliances. He did not even strive for rank. The Lunar Wolves were a legion that valued merit above all else, and Abaddon's merit was undeniable. Veterans began to take notice. Captains watched him from a distance and quietly praised his potential. The Mourningville, Horus's chosen council, observed this rising star and understood what he could become. While he did not yet sit at their table, Abaddon's path toward greatness was unmistakable. But beneath the victories, beneath the praise and growing fame, something else was forming. Something only the most perceptive could see. Ezekiel Abaddon carried with him a sense of absolute conviction and independence. He did not kneel to his father. He did not kneel for the gangs of Cthonia. And though he gave Horus his loyalty, it was not the loyalty of a subordinate. It was the loyalty of a chosen equal in waiting. A bond forged not from ritual, but from destiny. In these earliest days of his life and career, the seeds of the future Warmaster were already visible. His refusal to bow, his relentless will, his capacity to inspire fear, respect, and devotion. His belief that he alone must shape his path. Long before the Heresy, long before the Black Legion, and long before the galaxy learned to dread the name Abaddon the Despoiler, Ezekiel had already become something remarkable. A man who could not be broken, bought, or controlled. And throughout the halls of the Lunar Wolves, warriors whispered, sometimes in admiration, sometimes in fear, that one day this Chthonian warrior might stand second only to Horus himself. They were right, but even they could not imagine how far he would eventually rise, nor how far he would fall. The Great Crusade was the crucible in which Abaddon's legend truly began to forge itself into something undeniable. In this era, the Lunar Wolves were the Emperor's most beloved sons, victorious, disciplined, and unstoppable. Their campaigns were scripture written in bolter fire, and Abaddon quickly became one of the names that defined their glory. While many Space Marines earned distinction over decades, Abaddon did so in a fraction of that time. Wherever the Lunar Wolves advanced, he seemed to be at the tip of the spear, leading his brothers through walls of enemy fire with the same fierce confidence he'd carried from Chthonia's tunnels. It wasn't long before Horus himself took note. The Primarch had always been quick to reward merit, and Abaddon possessed that quality in abundance. His rise through the ranks was swift, but never unearned. Campaign records from those days, etched into ancient data slates and preserved only in fragments, speak of a warrior whose presence turned difficult engagements into routs. Abaddon's talent lay not just in skill, but in instinct, a natural understanding of battle that allowed him to read enemy movements like a seasoned general twice his age. This clarity of vision marked him as a leader, and when he stood among his brothers, they followed not out of duty, but out of trust. Even the most stoic veterans began to look to him during heated moments, sensing in him the raw, commanding force that would soon propel him higher still. The Primarch had always prized initiative and ruthless clarity. Abaddon demonstrated both in abundance. He did not wait to be told how to win. He simply did it. Reports began to accumulate, engagements where his judgment had turned the tide, missions assigned to him because failure was not an option. In the war councils that followed, when officers debated, Abaddon's solutions were direct, hard-edged, and usually correct. At first, he was simply captain of the First Company, the Justarian, the mailed fist of the Legion. That alone would have been a pinnacle any Astartes might spend centuries striving toward. The Justarian were more than elite. They were a statement. When they teleported into a war zone, it meant the battle's decision point had arrived. But Abaddon became something more than just their commander. He became the man Horus relied on when the line between strategy and execution blurred. The one he could trust to interpret an order as intended, not merely as spoken. Yet of all the steps Abaddon took in his early ascension, none was more defining than his induction into the Mourningville. The Mourningville was not a rank. It was not a council bound by oaths or rituals. It was something far more intimate, a circle of 4 warriors chosen personally by Horus to be his advisors, confidants, and moral compass. To be placed among them was a mark of profound respect. For Abaddon, it was an acknowledgement that his judgment mattered to the Warmaster, even before that title existed. Within the Mourningville, Abaddon found himself surrounded by men whose personalities could have not been more different. Garvel Loken, idealistic and loyal to a fault. Tarek Togodon, the Legion's beating heart of humour and warmth. Horus Axiomand, Little Horus, the tactical savant whose mind was as sharp as any blade, and then Abaddon himself, the Legion's iron, its unbreakable will. These four formed a balance that Horus relied on. Abaddon, however, was unlike the others in one crucial aspect. His loyalty to Horus was absolute. Where Locum would question, where Axiomand would caution, Abaddon would affirm. Where Togodon saw humour and nuance, Abaddon saw clarity. He did not waste words. He did not hesitate. To him, Horus was the axis on which the entire Imperium turned, and therefore the only voice that mattered. This devotion caught the Primarch's attention again and again, and each time Abaddon proved himself capable of speaking with a frankness others lacked. He held nothing back, and Horus valued that honesty, even when it cut deep. Out on the frontiers of the galaxy, Abaddon and the Mourneville fought at the Primarch's side through campaigns that tested the limits of human endurance. The Ullanor Crusade, the Ortarian War, the pacification of the Black Mountains. Each conflict was another stone in the foundation of Abaddon's growing legend. Stories circulated of him carving through orc war bosses twice his size, of his command squads holding choke points long enough for the main host to break enemy lines, of his uncanny ability to sense when and where the enemy would strike. From that moment onward, Abaddon was no longer merely a prodigy. He became the symbol of the Legion's martial identity. The pale armour of the Lunar Wolves gleamed brighter when he led the charge. Legionaries who hesitated before now charged fearlessly, knowing their first captain stood beside them. Entire armies broke under the ferocity of the 16th Legion's advance once Abaddon's banners were sighted on the horizon. Yet with the rank came responsibility beyond the battlefield. Abaddon now served as Horus's direct executor, carrying out orders with a precision that few could match. He took personal charge of elite strike forces, oversaw campaigns that required ruthless efficiency, and acted as the Warmaster's voice when Horus could not be present. This authority shaped him, sharpening his instincts for politics as well as war, giving him a taste of a commander a scale few Space Marines ever experienced. But leadership did not soften Abaddon. If anything, it only strengthened his natural intensity. He became the warrior other legions measured their best against, a duelist feared by champions, a strategist respected by commanders, and a figure whose presence demanded attention even among Primarchs. Over time, the Lunar Wolves ceased to see Ezekiel Abaddon as their first captain. He had become something more. He was the Legion's strength made manifest, its fury given form, its unstoppable will embodied in ceramite and gene-forged muscle. He was the right hand of Horus, and one day, he would become the instrument through which the galaxy would burn. But in these early years, before treachery, before the shadow of the Despoiler, Abaddon was, above all else, the finest warrior the Great Crusade had to offer, and the galaxy was only beginning to learn his name. The Great Crusade had forged Abaddon into the Lunar Wolves' greatest champion, but it was the Horus Heresy that forged him into something far darker, and the first cracks in the Imperium's golden facade began not with grand betrayal, nor with the declaration of rebellion, but with a single wound, one that struck the Warmaster himself. The world was Davin, a fetid sphere of swamps and rot. It should have been a simple compliance operation, a sealing of loose ends. Horus had conquered Davin years before, and the planet had bent the knee. But when a trusted officer, Eugene Temba, returned as a corrupted warlord leading undead horrors, the Lunar Wolves were sent to end the rebellion once and for all. Abaddon went to Davin at Horus's side, not yet knowing that the events on this world would later alter the course of his life forever. The moment their boots struck the planet's surface, something felt wrong. The air was thick with decay, and even through the filters on their helms the stench of death was overwhelming. As Abaddon and the Justarian advanced through the mire, they found not enemies waiting in battle lines but twisted corpses hanging from crude wooden frames, bodies half submerged in the swamp like sacrifices to some unseen power. When the traitor Temba's forces ambushed them, it wasn't with mortal men. It was with things that had once been human, rotten, swollen with infection, immune to pain. Abaddon cut them down with brutal efficiency, but even he sensed that the evil on Davin was nothing like the Xenos threats they had faced before. In the ruins of Temba's fortress, they found the rotting heart of the rebellion. But Temba no longer resembled a man. His body bloated with corruption, his arms swollen with unnatural muscle, his skin cracked with veins of black ichor. The Warmaster Horus engaged Eugene Temba to put an end to this once and for all. But to the surprise of Horus, the warlord's hulking, corpse-studded bulk lashed out, and his corrupted blade pierced Horus. The Warmaster fell, grievously wounded, carried back to the Vengeful Spirit by his sons. What followed was a nightmare of medical desperation. Apothecaries and surgeons laboured to save Horus's life, but the wound festered with a corruption none of them understood. Even the Primarch's phenomenal resilience struggled against whatever had been unleashed upon him. For the first time in living memory, Ezekiel Abaddon felt fear, not for himself, but for the one man he had dedicated his life to. As Horus lay dying, the Mournful gathered in grim silence. The mood was tense, fragmented. Loken urged caution, Axioman counselled patience, Toggodden tried to lift spirits. But Abaddon, he was a storm contained within Ceramite. He paced like a caged predator, jaw clenched, fists trembling in restrained rage. He was not a warrior built to wait or to hope. He was a warrior built to act. That opportunity came in the form of a man whose presence would doom the Imperium, Erebus of the Word-Bearers. His voice was like silk, his tone polite, but every word he spoke was poison coated in honey. He told Abaddon of a ritual, a healing that could save the Warmaster, one older than Imperial medicine, older than the Legion genecraft, a rite of spirits and power practiced in a place called the Serpent Lodge on Davin. Loken recalled immediately, sensing deception. He called Erebus a liar, a charlatan, but Abaddon, he listened. Because what Loken saw as heresy, Abaddon saw as hope. And Abaddon would do anything, to save Horus. So when Erebus suggested returning Horus to Davin to undergo the ritual, Abaddon's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. He agreed to the plan instantly, without hesitation, without doubt. Axioman followed his lead. Toggodden reluctantly acquiesced. Only Loken resisted, and even he was ultimately overruled. When they brought Horus back to the Serpent Lodge, Abaddon led the procession. He carried Horus's body with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. The ritual was enacted behind sealed doors, its inner workings unknown to the Astartes waiting outside. 9 days Abaddon waited outside the Serpent Lodge. Then as dawn broke on that 9th day, Horus walked out. Alive, strong, but now cold. Whatever had happened in the Serpent Lodge had changed Horus and put him down a different path, and the fiercely loyal Abaddon would follow him down it. There are moments in history where a single act cuts away all possibility of return. For Ezekiel Abaddon, that moment came on the ash-choked killing fields of Istvan III, where brother was ordered to slaughter brother, and where any lingering illusion that the Warmaster's rebellion might be a necessary course correction died in fire and betrayal. Until this point, Abaddon had stood at Horus's side through uneasy visions, secret councils, and whispered plans. Davin had lit the spark. The Serpent Lodge had opened the door. But Istvan III was where the truth of the Warmaster's path became fully visible, stripped of mysticism and prophecy. It was treachery executed not in shadow, but under the open sky. And Abaddon did not flinch. The plan, at first, was deceptively simple. The Lunar Wolves, Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and World Eaters deployed onto the planet under the pretense of suppressing a rebellion. Loyalist elements within each legion, those the Warmaster believed who would resist his new destiny, were deliberately assigned to the surface operation. Once they landed, Horus gave the order. A salvo of life-eater virus bombs rained down upon the planet. The atmosphere ignited into a firestorm that reduced every contaminated form of biological matter, human, Astartes and vegetation, into a bubbling slurry of organic sludge. From orbit, Abaddon oversaw the bombardment with a cold, determined clarity. He did not avert his eyes. He did not turn away. He watched as the virus spread in tidal waves across the cities below, consuming loyalist flesh in seconds, igniting their bones into ash. Many of those men had shared training halls with him. Some had bled beside him. A few had once called him friend. But Abaddon did not hesitate. For him, loyalty had already narrowed into a singular point, Horus's will. Everything outside that point was meaningless. But the virus did not claim them all. Some loyalists, through hardened armour or sheer determination or simple luck, survived the initial strike. They emerged into a world hellishly transformed. Charred buildings sagged under their own molten weight. The air was so hot that ceramite plating softened, the ground carpeted in mutagenic rot. And among those survivors was Garville Loken. His presence on the planet was a complication, one that Abaddon had not expected. Loken was not just any Lunar Wolf. He had once been as close to Abaddon as any brother could be. Their blades had crossed in countless training duels. Their voices had joined in oaths before the Warmaster. But Loken still clung to ideals Abaddon now saw as naive. Loyalty to the Emperor, faith in the Great Crusade, belief in a future shaped by honour rather than strength. These two men, once united under Horus, now found themselves on opposing sides of a war that neither had asked for, but one that Abaddon would now fight without remorse. Horus's solution was simple: send the traitor legions down to finish what the virus had not. The order was met with varying degrees of reluctance, horror, and zeal, but Abaddon accepted it without question. The time for doubt had passed. The time for sentiment was over. Loken and the Loyalists were obstacles, and obstacles are removed. Abaddon descended to the surface in his warplate, the armour gleaming in the dim light of the burning atmosphere. The lunar wolves that followed him did so with a mixture of awe and fear, for the first captain had become something colder in these days, something sharpened into a weapon. The world they stepped onto was no longer Istvan III, it was a carnal realm. The virus clouds hung thick and heavy, swirling like malevolent spirits. The ruins of once beautiful cities collapsed in slow motion as fire ate at their exposed foundations. The ground was slick with biological slurry, bubbling with a chemical decay. And somewhere within that nightmare, loyal Astartes dug in for a final stand. The fighting that followed was brutal and intimate. No orbital bombardments or grand manoeuvres, just squads clashing in the ruins, bolters roaring in hallways dripped with corrosive fluid. Abaddon moved through these battlefield labyrinths like an executioner. Each kill was swift, precise, necessary. He was not simply killing enemies, he was killing the remnants of the life he had once lived. At one burning plaza, he encountered a group of lunar wolves loyal to the Emperor. They recognised him instantly, some with relief, others with dread. One stepped forward and begged him to listen, to remember what they had once fought for. Abaddon's answer was silent and terminal, a single strike from his weapon that tore through armour and heart alike. There was no anger in him, no hatred, only purpose. Word eventually reached him. Loken lived. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Abaddon's expression. Not regret, not guilt, but recognition. A final thread tying him to the warrior he had once been. He went to find him. Their meeting came not in a grand hall but in a ruined hab block, half collapsed and burning from the inside. They said little, for there was no debate left, no argument capable of turning Abaddon from his path. Loken accused him of betraying everything they had once sworn to uphold. Abaddon accused Loken of clinging to a lie crafted by a false emperor. Their blades spoke the rest. Ceramites shattered under crushing force. Sparks erupted as their weapons clashed again and again. The ground shook beneath their feet. To any observer, it would have looked like two demigods locked in a battle that could tear the world apart. But Abaddon was the stronger. He had always been. With a final, devastating strike, he drove Loken to the ground. The Lord Captain's armour cracked. His breath came ragged. Yet Abaddon did not finish the kill. Not at first. There was a hesitation, so brief it could almost be imagined. A memory perhaps, a ghost of brotherhood. Then his resolve hardened. He ended the duel, or so he believed. By the time the traitor legions completed their purge, Istvan III had become a graveyard world, its cities hollowed, its survivors few, its soil soaked with the blood of Astartes on both sides. For Abaddon, the campaign marked a transformation more profound than any genetic alteration or promotion. Istvan III was the moment he internalised the truth of his new path. There could be no half measures, no divided loyalties, no return. The Warmaster's cause was now his cause, the rebellion now his identity, and Ezekiel Abaddon was no longer simply the first captain of the Lunar Wolves. He had become the instrument through which the galaxy's greatest civil war would be unleashed. From the ashes of Istvan III, the long war had truly begun. The march toward terror was not a campaign, it was a pilgrimage of destruction. After Istvan III burned, after the Istvan V massacre shattered the Loyalist legions, after the traitor fleet carved its bloody path through the stars, there remained only one destination: the throne world, the cradle of mankind, the shining jewel of the Emperor's domain. The Warmaster's rebel armada tore into the Sol system like a storm of iron and warp fire. The outer defences fell with brutal efficiency, shattered under the guns of traitor warships and demonic engines. Abaddon led the vanguard from the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, the first captain's presence radiating the cold severity of a warrior who had burned every bridge behind him. To the traitor legions, he was an icon. To the loyalists, he was the herald of catastrophe. Terror's skies turned black with smoke on the day the bombardment began. The palace wall shook under the crash of orbital artillery. Dust and debris drifted across the golden spires like ash from a dying sun. But for all the fury unleashed upon it, terror did not break. Not in those early days. The Imperial Fists held the walls with grim determination. The Blood Angels hurled themselves into the thickest fighting. The White Scars tore through traitor lines with lightning speed. And somewhere within that vast conflict, Abaddon moved from battlefield to battlefield like a blade seeking its final cut. Even as the traitors pushed deeper, the Sons of Horus were beginning to unravel. Horus's transformation, physical, spiritual, and psychological, had accelerated. No longer the noble general they had once revered, he had become something else entirely. Something twisted, something monstrously powerful. Whispers spread like contagion. Some said the Warmaster barely resembled a man anymore. Others claimed they could feel the warp crawling beneath his skin. Abaddon heard the whispers but ignored them. Ignored the fear in the eyes of warriors who had once followed Horus without question. Ignored the cracks spreading through the Legion's once proud discipline. He had no room for doubt. Not now, not ever. But doubt was a shadow, and even he could not fully escape it. In the dark hours between battles, Abaddon would sometimes find himself alone in the corridors of the Vengeful Spirit, staring at his reflection in the darkened adamantium plates. There, in the flickering light, he caught glimpses of what he was becoming. A man standing at the crossroad of loyalty and damnation. A warrior carving a path through corpses toward a future he could not see clearly. Yet whenever Horus summoned him, those thoughts evaporated. The Warmaster's presence, radiant, terrible, and overwhelming, filled Abaddon with renewed purpose. There was no turning back. Only forward, into fire. The assault on terror was not a single charge, but a grinding descent into hell. And at its heart, Ezekiel Abaddon led one of the most ambitious thrusts of the entire war. Where many remember the Eternity Gate, last threshold of the Imperial Palace, Abaddon's path lay elsewhere, toward the Cthonia Gate, the jewel of Rogol Dawn's defensive network and one of the most bitterly contested fronts of the entire siege. To the traitors, Cthonia appeared vulnerable, a weakness in the southern bastion walls, a flaw in the seams of Imperial stone. But it was no oversight. Dawn had designed it to look weak. He wanted the Warmaster's sons to see it as a crack in the shell, a place where victory might be forced if driven with enough fury. Beneath its battlements, its fortifications were layered, reinforced, and killing ground precise. A snare waiting for any who believed terror could be broken by pressure alone. Abaddon believed he could break it. He committed his Justarian elites, tunnelling beneath the walls using termite assault drills and a subterranean spear meant to gut the Imperial defence from below. The earth quaked as drills bit into ancient bedrock, spilling black armoured Astartes into the underworks beneath the palace. For a moment, only a moment, it seemed as if the wall might truly fall. Then Cthonia awoke. Imperial Fist counter-assault teams surged through murder tunnels with bolters roaring. The lower galleries became choke points of agony where every metre was paid for in lives. Rockcrete was poured like liquid burial, collapsing escape routes, sealing entire companies alive beneath the stone they sought to conquer. The slaughter was merciless. Abaddon fought like a wounded god, carving upwards toward collapsing galleries, his terminators dying in heaps around him. His armour cracked, ichor and blood mixing across the black of his plate. When the breach sealed behind him, he barely escaped entombment, forced to rip himself from the jaws of death through emergency teleportation as the last of his warriors were buried under thousands of tons of palace walls. Cthonia was not just a defeat, it was humiliation. And for Abaddon, it was a scar that would never fully close. After the failed assault on the Cthonia Gate, Abaddon was recovering from his wounds aboard the Vengeful Spirit. It was here he heard of the Emperor teleporting aboard in a desperate counter-attack to eliminate Horus. Hearing this, all pain and fatigue disappeared and left him with only fury. A fury that drove him to be at the Warmaster's side, cutting down anyone who stood in his way. Abaddon reached the bridge where Horus was meant to be, only to realise he was too late. The Emperor and Horus had already met. Their duel had concluded, and the Warmaster lay dead. Abaddon pushed through the shattered doors of the command chamber and froze at the sight before him. Horus, his armour torn open, his body broken, lied amidst the ruin of his throne dais. The Emperor was gone. The battlefield was silent. For the first time in his life, Abaddon felt something collapse inside him. He knelt beside his dead Genesire, unable to understand how the greatest being he'd ever known could be reduced to this fragile, ruined thing. He should have wept. He should have raged. But Abaddon only bowed his head, numb and hollow, before removing the talon of Horus. This was not the death of a warlord. This was the death of his purpose. Around him, the Legion faltered. Commanders argued. Warriors panicked. But Abaddon rose slowly to his feet, the light gone from his eyes, replaced with a cold fire more dangerous than grief. He issued a single order, one that changed the future of Chaos forever. Withdraw. Not out of cowardice, not out of fear, but because the war Horus had begun was no longer the Warmaster's war. It was now Abaddon's. The retreat from terror was not a defeat. It was a beginning. For as the Vengeful Spirit slipped into the warp, Ezekiel Abaddon swore an oath that would echo across 10,000 years. Never again would the sons of Horus bow to a dead man's dream. He would forge a destiny worthy of the Warmaster, and worthy of himself. The flight from terror was not an escape. It was a shattering. The traitor armada fled into the warp like wounded predators, limping, bleeding, and snarling from the defeat they had suffered. The Warmaster was dead. The rebellion had collapsed, and the forces that had once stormed the palace in perfect, brutal unison now drifted apart like fragments of a broken blade. Inside the Vengeful Spirit, Ezekiel Abaddon walked through the corridors drenched in silence. The ship had once echoed with the war chants of the 16th Legion, now the Sons of Horus, felt hollow. Its crew moved with the slow dread of men who knew their future had evaporated. The death of Horus hadn't just ended a war, it had ripped the soul from an entire legion. For Abaddon, the loss was a wound no apothecary could heal. Horus had been more than a commander, more than a Primarch, more than a father. He had been purpose, and now he was gone. In the early weeks of the retreat, Abaddon vanished into the Vengeful Spirit's labyrinth decks. No one knew where he slept. Few dared to approach him. He wandered the ship alone, wearing the same bloodstained warplate from the Siege of Terror. He walked through mustering halls now littered with shattered banners, through apothecarian vaults overflowing with bodies of fallen Astartes, through the stratagem where Horus had once stood tall and radiant. Now the hololithic map pits flickered with half-dead power. The air smelled of burnt ozone and lingering despair, and the throne at the heart of the chamber sat empty. When Abaddon stopped before it, he felt nothing. No rage, no sorrow, only a void. The legion he championed was dissolving. Officers argued over succession. War bands splintered. Some fled into the Eye of Terror, others deserted entirely. Worse still, other traitor legions began circling like carrion birds. Word spread that the Emperor's vengeance was falling upon rebels across the galaxy. The Loyalist counter-offensive, later known as the Scouring, crushed what resistance remained. The traitors had become prey, and Abaddon felt all of it slipping away. The Sons of Horus had once been the greatest of the Emperor's creations. Their discipline, their unity, their ferocity in war, these traits had made them the paragon against which other legions measured themselves. But in the wake of the heresy, they were unrecognisable. Dissension spread like a contagion. One warband accused another of cowardice. Another refused orders from anyone not named Horus. Champions proclaimed themselves heirs to the Warmaster's mantle. Some even claimed visions from demons promising them leadership. The Legion was dying, not from wounds inflicted by loyalists, but from rot within. Abaddon knew it. He felt it. He watched it unfold. But he did nothing. Not yet. For even as he walked among the ruins of his Legion, another force was taking shape within him. A force colder and more calculating than anything he had known before. The greatest insult came from outside the Legion, and from within it. Fabius Bile, once chief apothecary of the Emperor's children, had taken it upon himself to clone Horus. He claimed it was a gift, to restore the drive and unity the traitors had lost. But it was an abomination, crafted not from reverence, but curiosity. Bile sought Horus not to resurrect the Warmaster's legacy, but to dissect it, to learn from it, to twist it into something new. When Abaddon learned of this clone, something ancient and savage stirred in him. The Sons of Horus, leaderless and without direction, were drawn to the clone as moths to a dying flame. Some fell to their knees and pledged themselves immediately. Others saw it as a second chance at victory. A few even believed the clone was the real Horus reborn. But Abaddon saw only a mockery. When the clone walked among them, taller than any Astartes, armoured in the dull green of the suns, Abaddon confronted him directly. For a moment, the two stood face to face in a ruined temple on Millennium, the air thick with warp-spawn fumes. The clone spoke with Horus's voice. He moved with Horus's gestures. He tried to command the Legion with Horus's authority. But Abaddon felt no connection to him. No loyalty, no recognition. He saw only a hollow echo wearing his father's skin. With a single stroke of the talon of Horus, Abaddon cut the clone down. The false Primarch crumpled, lifeless, before any could react. Gasps spread across the Legion. Bar's experiment shattered in moments. The corpse was burned under Abaddon's orders until every trace of it was ash scattered into warp winds. And with that one act, Ezekiel Abaddon claimed something he had never dared to claim before. He alone would decide the fate of Horus's sons. Abaddon returned to the stratagem where Horus had once led the galaxy's greatest armies. The throne was still empty. Dust lay thick on the armrests. Demonic shadows flickered at the edge of the hololithic displays. Abaddon placed his gauntleted hand upon the throne, not to sit, but to steady himself. He spoke only once, in a low voice that carried through the chamber.
Horus failed, but the long war is not finished.
The darkness around him stirred, as though listening.
From this day, we do not kneel to ghosts.
In the wake of defeat, amid ruin and despair, Ezekiel Abaddon discovered the truth he had been running from since Terror. He was no longer the Warmaster's son. He was something far greater. He was the heir to the Long War, and the galaxy had just gained its most relentless enemy. There are moments in history when a single decision reshapes the destiny of millions. For Ezekiel Abaddon, that moment came not in war, nor in victory, nor even in rebellion, but in the smouldering aftermath of defeat. The sons of Horus lay broken, scattered across the Eye of Terror, their reputation ruined, their unity shattered, their purpose lost. They were no longer a legion, they were carrion. Abaddon summoned what remained of the Legion aboard the Vengeful Spirit. They came in ragged groups, helmless warriors with torn armour, sergeants leading squads reduced to pairs, champions dragging wounded brothers, entire companies replaced by a single survivor. The muster hall of the ship echoed with the hollow clang of broken ceramite. No one stood in neat ranks. No one raised banners. No one spoke. The sons of Horus had become a ghost of themselves. Abaddon stood before them and said nothing. Not at first. He let them see him, unbowed, unbroken, still wearing the same armour he had donned for the Siege of Terror. Scars crossed his gauntlets. The talon of Horus was marked by fresh gouges. His expression held no grief, only determination. When he finally spoke, his voice carried through the hall like a tolling of a funeral bell.
You are not sons of Horus. Not anymore.
The words struck them harder than any bolt round.
You kneel to a dead man. You cling to a name soaked in failure. You worship ashes and wonder why you are ashes yourselves.
He scanned the broken warriors before him, eyes burning with something deeper than rage.
Horus is gone, but we endure.
A murmur rippled through the crowd. Shock, anger, confusion, but no one interrupted.
Today we cast off our shame. Today we rise reborn. Today we claim a new destiny.
And then, with deliberate precision, he reached up and tore from his armour the Eye of Horus, the symbol that had defined the Legion for centuries. He cast it to the floor. The sound of it striking the deck rang like a challenge to the galaxy.
I am no longer first among the sons of the Warmaster. I am the only heir of the Long War. And you, if you have the strength, will follow me. Not as sons of Horus.
He raised the talon high.
As the Black Legion.
The transformation was not immediate. It was a slow, painful metamorphosis, marked by blood, ritual, and battle. Abaddon began erasing every symbol, every colour, every relic tied to Horus's name. The pale sea-green armour of the 16th Legion was repainted in the deepest obsidian, a black so reflective it seemed to drink in surrounding light. Trim and markings were renewed in the gold of Dominion, not as tribute, but as declaration. Every warrior performed this transformation themselves. Every brushstroke was an act of liberation. Every plate of armour reborn was a step away from shame. The Eye of Horus was replaced by a new emblem, a blazing 8-pointed star, symbolising mastery of the warp and the unending scope of their ambitions. The Legion's most sacred title, Justarian, was reclaimed, its warriors reforged into Abaddon's personal strike cadres. Among them were new champions who pledged themselves to him not because of Horus's legacy, but because of Abaddon's vision. Fulcus Kibri, once Horus's favoured warrior, swore fealty. Iskander Kayon, sorcerer of prodigious power, pledged his blade and mind. And finally, Leovine Urkis, former captain of the World Eaters known for his tactical skill and bloodlust. But the greatest challenge was not rebuilding the Legion, it was convincing the other traitor legions that the Black Legion was a force to be feared. In time, Abaddon united the scattered remnants of the traitor legions into something approaching a coherent force. They were not a single army, and never would be, but Abaddon had no desire to recreate the rigid structures of the past. Instead, he forged alliances through strength. He built loyalty through victory. He inspired fear through certainty. He promised the Black Legion one thing: the Long War would continue, and they would win it. They would not merely raid. They would not merely survive. They would not merely hide in the warp. They would wage war across millennia, one crusade after another, until the Imperium burned. The birth of the Black Legion was not enough. Ezekiel Abaddon knew it the moment the last oath was spoken aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Paint and heraldry meant nothing without conquest. A new name meant nothing without blood to sanctify it. And a new leader meant nothing unless the galaxy learned to fear him. The Imperium believed the traitor legions broken, scattered, directionless, and beaten. Abaddon would disprove that with fire. He would ignite a war that would echo across 10,000 years. He would launch the first of what would become the dread Black Crusades, and he would claim the title that had once belonged to Horus alone, Warmaster. It began like a storm breaking over real space, sudden, violent, and utterly without warning. The Eye of Terror tore open with a howl only heard by psychers and madmen, and from its bleeding wound surged the newly forged Black Legion. Obsidian armour, trimmed in the gold of conquest, thundered forth under a single banner: Abaddon, Warmaster of Chaos. 10,000 years after Horus's fall, his son in war came to test the Imperium's strength, not with whispers or raids, but with open war. The First Black Crusade had begun, and the Imperium held its breath. Abaddon's war fleet aimed not for weakness, but for the strongest bastion that barred the path from the Eye into the galaxy beyond. Cadia, Fortress World, Sentinel of the Cadian Gate, bulwark guarding humanity's throat. Any lesser warlord would have turned aside, taken softer targets first, gathered strength. Abaddon chose fire instead. If Cadia burned, the Imperium would bleed everywhere, so he struck at the gate of the galaxy itself. Cadia did not fall easily. The sky burned green with lancefire as the Black Legion descended, drop craft streaking like black meteors. On the walls, the defenders roared hymns of defiance. Astra Militarum shock regiments, Kassakin kill teams, and among them stood the newly born chapter descended from Sigismund's own legacy, the Black Templars. Their fleet met Abaddon in high orbit, and at their head, aged but unbroken, stood Sigismund, first High Marshal, last champion of the Imperial Fists, the Emperor's blade made flesh. The clash was titanic. Void shields flared into dying suns as the Eternal Crusader and the Vengeful Spirit traded blows across the void. Boarding torpedoes struck like spears hurled by gods. Astartes met Astartes in corridors slick with oil and blood. Abaddon carved his way through bulkheads, a force of nature made steel, the talon of Horus crackling with ruinous power. Sigismund cut through Black Legion elites like wheat beneath a scythe. Two legends carved from the same age, now on opposite sides of eternity. Their duel came at the heart of the Eternal Crusader, only carnage around them and the hum of life support failing. Sigismund fought like a relic of a brighter age, every strike a memory of terror, every parry a denial that Horus's legacy lived on. Abaddon answered with 10,000 years of bitterness honed into purpose. The duel lasted minutes that felt like hours, and when the final blow fell, it was the Warmaster who stood victorious. But bleeding and broken, the scar burning across his body a mark he would carry for centuries. Sigismund died with defiance in his eyes, refusing to kneel even at the end. Abaddon permitted no gloating. no speeches, only silence for a worthy enemy. The galaxy felt his passing. But Cadia did not fall. Not yet. In the wake of Sigismund's death, the Crusade spiraled outward like shrapnel from an orbital bombardment. While Abaddon bled in the stratagem of the Vengeful Spirit, warbands lured to him or drawn by his rising star rampaged across Segmentum Obscurus. The agri-worlds of Velsia was turned to ash. Its crops burned, its oceans boiled, its population left as nothing more than offerings to the dark. The floating hive cities of Melphia suffered worse. They fell into the clouds like wounded leviathans, their impact raising dust storms seen from orbit, millions crushed beneath collapsing steel. Chaos was not advancing, chaos was devouring. And yet even triumph draws predators. Thagus Daravek came like a knife in the back, a rival chaos warlord, swollen on demon packs and arrogance, seeking to snatch Abaddon's momentum. His fleet tore into the Crusade without warning, warp sigils flaring like open wounds. For a moment, the Black Legion fractured, warbands scattered, supply lines severed, victories threatened. Abaddon had not expected the challenge, but he adapted faster than any mortal mind could comprehend. He did not meet Davarek in battle. He did not waste strength on a second front. He let the rival fleet burn itself against the storm and bled it dry through manoeuvre, attrition, and misdirection until Daravak's ambition died screaming in the void. And yet even victory was not what mattered most. For while worlds died and crusades shook the Segmentum, the dark gods watched, and they judged the Warmaster worthy. Abaddon felt the pull like gravity, like instinct older than bone. Deep in the Eye of Terror lay the demon world Urlan, realm of shifting stone and screaming air. There, the Tower of Silence rose like a needle-piercing reality, its walls changing as thought changed, its corridors defying logic. Only one prize lay within, one relic cursed and coveted in equal measure. Drach'nyen, a demon-sword. Abaddon walked alone through the tower, hallucinations clawing at his mind, whispers promising both glory and damnation. He faced spectres of the past, Horus's shadow, Loken's disapproval, Sigismund's dying stare. He banished them all. Floor by floor, the tower reshaped itself to break him. It failed. At the summit lay the blade, thrumming like a heartbeat, hungry beyond words. Many had tried to claim it. None had succeeded. Abaddon reached out, not as a slave of chaos, but as its chosen. The demon screamed, reality buckled, and with one act of will Abaddon claimed the sword once denied to all others. Drach'nyen howled in triumph, bound to the Warmaster not by corruption, but by recognition. Chaos gained its champion that day. The First Black Crusade ended as clouds of warp flame closed behind the retreating fleets, not in defeat, but in declaration. Cadia still stood, but the Imperium no longer slept. A Primarch's heir had returned, bearing the sword of his father's damnation. Abaddon had carved his name into history, not as Horus's shadow, but as the architect of a new age of war. The Imperium had survived Abaddon's First Black Crusade, but survival is not victory. In the decades that followed, the Imperium rebuilt, rewrote its histories, and soothed itself with the comforting lie that the traitor legions, those fragmented renegade hosts lost in the Eye of Terror, would never rise again in any organised form. It was a lie born from fear, and lies born from fear are always the most fragile. Abaddon let that lie live. He let it grow, and then he shattered it. The Gothic sector was a distant span of stars, proud, fortified, prosperous. A place famous for its naval academies and shipyards, a linchpin of the Imperium's control over the western edge of Segmentum Obscurus. An area so secure that many commanders there believed the Eye of Terror's storms were little more than an inconvenience. Abaddon's warships emerged in the heart of the sector like predators bursting from the depths of a black ocean. No warning, no time to prepare, no mercy. The opening salvos were so sudden, so precise, that entire battle groups vanished in the first hours. Vox networks went silent. Astropaths died screaming. Orbital defense platforms detonated before their crews could even report the enemy's arrival. The Imperium did not know it yet, but it had entered the crucible of the Gothic War. And at the centre of the storm stood Abaddon. He commanded his forces from the Vengeful Spirit, its hull wreathed in warp fire, its engines screaming with demonic fury. The Black Legion surged around him in a dark tide. Warbands from fallen legions, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Alpha Legionaries, joined the assault, each offering their blades under Abaddon's iron will. But the terror truly began when Abaddon revealed the weapon he had kept hidden until the perfect moment. The Planet Killer. A warship unlike anything the Imperium had faced. Its colossal prow housed an energy lance capable of shearing continents from planetary crust. Its engines left a wake of annihilation. Its silhouette cut across the void like a scythe of an angry god. Its first test came against the world of Savathun. The people of Savathun believed their fortifications impenetrable. They trusted in their orbital bastions, their defence fleets, and their faith in the Emperor. They watched the scans as the Planet Killer approached. They read the data wrong. They mistook the scale. They did not understand what Abaddon had forged. The Planet Killer opened fire. A spear of hell light erupted from its prow, carving through the void and hammering into Savathun's surface. The crust split. Oceans boiled. Cities ruptured in an instant. A shockwave tore across the planet's surface like a hand of a wrathful titan. Within minutes, Savathun ceased to exist. Its people became shadows burned into the stone. Its continents became smoke drifting through space. The Imperium's confidence shattered with it. Abaddon did not linger to admire the devastation. He pressed onward, each assault a calculated strike, each victory a stepping stone toward a far greater goal. It was not destruction he sought, not mindless slaughter like the World Eaters, nor decadent excess like the Emperor's children. No, Abaddon aimed at something far older, far more potent, and far more dangerous. He aimed at the Blackstone fortresses. 6 of these titanic relics drifted through the Gothic sector, ancient beyond human understanding. No one knew who built them, not the Adeptus Mechanicus, not the Imperial scholars. They were relics of a time before mankind's first spark of civilization, structures of impossible geometry designed to manipulate energies few could comprehend. Abaddon understood one thing: they were weapons, and he intended to claim them. The Blackstone fortresses reacted to his presence like slumbering beasts stirred by a familiar scent. Their surfaces rippled with eerie light. Arcane energies pulsed across their interiors. They had slept for millennia. Abaddon meant to awaken them. The first fortress fell to him after a brutal void engagement, where Imperial cruisers were torn apart like toys hurled into a furnace. Abaddon boarded it himself, striding through its labyrinth corridors, each footstep echoing in chambers untouched since the birth of Terra's first kings. Demons cawed in the shadows. Strange energies warped gravity. The walls themselves seemed alive, shifting, changing, and watching. But Abaddon did not hesitate. He pressed on, guided by whispers that seemed to call him deeper into the fortress's core. When he finally reached the central chamber, he placed his hand upon the ancient control node and the entire structure shuddered awake. A weapon older than empires now answered to Ezekiel Abaddon. It would not be the last. One by one, through conquest or destruction, the Blackstone fortresses fell to him. 2 he seized completely, mastering their systems with the help of sorcerers, demons, and a young psyker named Dravora Morkath, who he manipulated with implanted memories to ensure obedience. The remaining fortresses he annihilated, denying the Imperium any hope of reclaiming their power. Panic rippled across the sector. Imperial commanders scrambled to muster reinforcements. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus invoked ancient emergency rites in the hope of understanding what Abaddon was doing. It was already too late. With each fortress he claimed, Abaddon gained control over energies capable of disrupting the very fabric of reality. Warp storms flared. Astronomicon signals flickered. Entire fleets were lost in sudden, inexplicable gravitational anomalies. The Imperium was fighting not a man, but a force of nature. And for the first time since the death of Horus, the Imperium feared that a Warmaster had returned. When the final battles of the Gothic War erupted, the sector had become a graveyard of broken hulls and burning worlds. Imperial admirals fought with suicidal fury, desperate to salvage something from the storm. In their final assault, they threw every remaining warship against the Planet Killer, hammering it with torpedoes and lance fire until its engines buckled and its hull cracked open. The Planet Killer was destroyed, but Abaddon had already achieved what it came for. 2 Blackstone fortresses were his, 4 had been denied to the Imperium forever, and an entire sector lay in ruins. The Imperium called it a Pyrrhic victory. They whispered it was a warning, and they prayed it would be the last time Abaddon struck with such force. They were wrong. The Gothic War was only a rehearsal. The Warmaster was preparing for a far greater assault, one that would shake the very pillars of the Imperium for centuries to come. and Ezekiel Abaddon was just getting started. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had whispered a single assurance to itself in the dark: Cadia stands. It was more than a fortress world. It was the gate that held the Eye of Terror at bay. A world raised from childhood to war, shaped by generations of discipline, forged in fire and expectation. Cadia stood because it could not fall. If it did, the galaxy would change forever. Which is why Ezekiel Abaddon chose it as the target of his greatest work. The 13th Black Crusade was not a simple assault, nor a raid, nor a strike made reckless with fury. It was a symphony of cruelty and strategy, a plan woven over centuries, each thread tied to another in dark precision. Abaddon had prepared the galaxy for this moment long before Imperial sensors detected the first pulse of warp flame in the void. He had ignited cult uprisings in distant sectors, stirred Xenos empires into conflict, and seeded demon incursions across dozens of worlds. Each one of these acts was a distraction, each seemingly random, yet each pulling Imperial forces farther away from the Cadian Gate. So when the true storm broke, Cadia faced it alone. The first sign of doom was the sky itself. Astropaths aboard Cadian orbitals cried out as the warp ripped, thickened, and pulled itself open like a wound torn across the heavens. From within that wound came Abaddon's fleet, a vast, nightmarish armada of demon engines, corrupted warships, warp-twisted battle barges, and the ancient, haunted hull of the Vengeful Spirit. The sight of it paralysed even veteran soldiers. Some officers froze at their command posts, unable to comprehend the enormity of what approached. Cadia had faced invasion before, but never this. Never him. Abaddon did not sit upon the bridge of his flagship like a distant overseer. He stood at the prow, silent and immovable, watching the world that had defied him for millennia. His battered, scarred armour caught the sickly light of the warp, the talon of Horus flexing with anticipation. To him, this was not merely a campaign. It was justice. It was inevitability incarnate. The first blows fell from orbit. The planet killer, once thought lost, opened fire with its colossal warp furnace cannon, its emerald beam slicing through the void like a god's finger of annihilation. Defence stations shattered. Void shields failed. Battle platforms that had stood for centuries were pulverised in seconds. Cadia's orbital ring buckled under the barrage, its great bastions wrenched into debris fields that drifted slowly across the world's night sky. Still, Cadia did not break. Its generals rallied their forces. Regiments surged to fortifications that had been carved and reinforced by generations. Kassakin squads deployed with flawless precision. Imperial Guard tank columns rolled into position, dust clouds billowing beneath their tracks. Battle hymns rose from the trenches. The Cadian Gate began to glow with the ignition of 1,000 macro batteries. Cadian shadows fought in streets where the sky no longer existed, instead replaced by a seething aurora of warpstorm colours. The traitor Legion forces descended in relentless waves, boots crushing centuries of Imperial stonework. But Cadia refused to bow, even as black ships choked the heavens, even as astropathic beacons fell dark, even as every fortress line was reduced to a memory. Cadia did not kneel. So Abaddon unleashed his final gambit, the act that would be carved into Imperial memory with fire and grief. One of the ancient Blackstone fortresses, Will of Eternity, broke orbital anchors and descended like a falling moon. Not to bombard, not to threaten, but to crush Cadia itself. It fell not silently, but with a sound like reality tearing, as if the galaxy itself gasped. The fortress struck the planet's surface with apocalyptic force. Mountain ranges folded like parchment, oceans flashed to steam, cities vanished beneath tidal waves of fire. And at the impact's heart, where land shattered like glass, the Cadian pylon network, the ancient stones that held the Eye of Terror in place, began to rupture. Warp storms bled through the fractures, reality unravelling like torn silk. The planet did not merely fall, it broke. Chunks of Cadia, still burning, drifted into low orbit. Continents peeled away into void. Millions died without a grave. Yet even then, even as the planet split beneath their feet, guardsmen continued firing. Tank crews went down with engines overheating and barrels glowing red. Cadians held their posts while the world they stood on ceased to exist. They only broke when the ground did. Abaddon watched from the command gallery of the Vengeful Spirit, not with triumph or joy, but with something far more dangerous: satisfaction. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had held Cadia as the unbreachable wall against the Eye. For 10,000 years, it had stood defiant. And now, at long last, Abaddon had torn down the gate. The message was not victory, it was prophecy. If Cadia can fall, anything can. The warp storms roared open. The Cadian Gate became a wound in reality, and Abaddon turned from the viewport, victorious. For the first time since the Siege of Terror, chaos was not contained. Cadia died to buy the galaxy a final warning, a warning Abaddon made certain they understood. The Long War was no longer coming. It had arrived. The galaxy changed the day the Cicatrix Maledictum tore reality in half. Worlds vanished into roaring warp storms. Empires split like fractured glass. Stars themselves seemed to scream under the violent birth of the Great Rift. For billions, it was the end of the world. For Ezekiel Abaddon, it was the opportunity he had been waiting 10,000 years to claim. From the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, he watched the night sky rupture into a wound of impossible brilliance. For a moment, the light washed over him, drowning the ship in a glare of blue fire, as if the universe itself had cracked open to reveal a deeper, darker truth beneath. The crew recoiled. Sorcerers cried out, shielding their minds. Even the ancient demons chained within the ship's wards shrieked like animals sensing their cage splitting. Abaddon simply watched. He had pursued this moment, not intentionally, not with the precision of a single plan, but with the weight of every Black Crusade he had ever launched, every assault on Cadia, every blow against the Imperium's pylons, every ripple he had sent into the fabric of reality. And now the galaxy was breaking exactly as it needed to break. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. The Long War had entered a new age. The Imperium was divided, literally. Half its worlds were cut off from terror, drowning in warp storms that would not abate. Astropaths burned out by the thousand. Navigators fell into comas mid-voyage. Entire sectors lost contact with one another, becoming islands in a sea of madness. But the Black Legion? They moved through the rift like sharks cutting through crimson water. The warp was their element. Chaos was their language. The nightmares blooming across the galaxy were not threats, they were opportunities. Abaddon sent strike fleets into newly isolated realms, exploiting panic and miscommunication. Worlds that once believed themselves part of an untouchable empire suddenly found themselves alone, vulnerable and desperate. The Warmaster made sure they didn't stay that way. He descended upon these worlds with the precision of a guillotine, carving them open, taking slaves, raising new fortresses, looting forgotten relics, and binding entire populations in chains of terror. Where the Imperium saw a crisis, Abaddon saw momentum, a tide he could ride without resistance. But he was not blind to the shifting nature of the gods he served. The warp roared louder now, its currents unruly and volatile. The gods of chaos, freed from the constraints that Cadia's pylons had once imposed, surged with hunger. Their servants flooded into real space, demons in numbers unseen since the Age of Strife. Many Chaos warlords believed this was a time for reckless abandon, for indulgence, for plunging fully into servitude to the gods. Abaddon believed otherwise. Where others saw worship, he saw weakness. He visited demon worlds where princes bowed to him and demanded they swear fealty not to their patron gods, but to the Warmaster. When one refused, Abaddon carved its essence apart with Drach'nyen, binding the demon's remnants into the blade as fuel for his endless war. Power did not mean giving himself to the gods. It meant bending their gifts to his will. In this new era, he no longer needed to contest with rivals who challenged his authority in public battles. The Great Rift made ambitions swell like tumours, but each time a challenger arose, a warlord swollen with Nurgle's blessings, a champion with 8 arms forged by Tzeentch, a demon engine master driven mad by Khorne, Abaddon answered in the only language Chaos respected: violence, precision, finality. Word spread through the Eye of Terror that the Warmaster had entered a new state of mind. He was colder, sharper, more patient. He acted not as a conqueror seeking trophies, but as a monarch consolidating his kingdom. The galaxy was wounded, and he was the infection spreading through it. Every warband that joined him fed the Black Legion's growing might. Every warband that refused him vanished into myth. Even the Dark Council upon the demon world of Zarkoth bowed their horn heads as Abaddon walked between their obsidian thrones, Drach'nyen humming like a caged storm. They granted him the Shadow Crown, a token from the oldest nightmare lords of the Eye. It was not an object but a title carved from fear itself. Warmaster of the Dark Imperium, Lord of the Demon Spires, the Shadow Crowned. But Abaddon himself rejected the pomp. Titles meant nothing unless they served purpose, and purpose burned in him like a furnace, to exploit the Imperium's fracture until nothing unifying remained. He had already broken Cadia. He had shattered its pylons. He had wounded the Emperor's empire in ways no Primarch had managed since the Heresy. Now he would break its spine. Through the Rift, Abaddon launched raid campaigns that targeted Lighthouse worlds, systems whose signals held entire subsectors together. Destroying them meant plunging whole regions into chaos. He struck shrine worlds, not because he hated faith, but because their destruction sent panic ripples across every devout system from Segmentum Solar to Ultimar. He targeted agri-worlds not for the need of food, but to starve countless other worlds. Every move was calculated. Every action served a future no one else could see. But then came a moment that even Abaddon had not anticipated. A Primarch returned. Guilliman's reappearance rippled through the Imperium like a lightning bolt. It shifted the balance. It provided hope. It gave the Corpse Empire something it had not felt in millennia, the possibility of resurgence. When Abaddon first heard the news, he did not rage. He did not curse the gods. He did not pace or brood. He simply tightened his grip on the talon of Horus. This was not a setback. It was an opportunity. A worthy foe had returned to the board, and Abaddon knew something Guilliman did not. The Imperium was no longer at war with a rebellion. It was at war with a kingdom without borders, a kingdom made of shadow and hatred and fire, a kingdom whose ruler could not be killed, broken or deterred. In the era of the Great Rift, Abaddon finally grasped something that had eluded him for 10,000 years, the feeling of inevitability. The Imperium might rally, Guilliman might rebuild, Primaris reinforcements might pour across the stars. But the galaxy was no longer the Emperor's throne room. It was a battlefield shaped by Abaddon's hand. And in that new darkness, he moved like a sovereign. The Shadow Crown fit him well. You have received the transmission of Dominissimo Voxlore. The warp storms recede, but the shadow of the Despoiler endures, reaching across the stars with the promise of 10,000 years of vengeance. Mark your allegiance, strike the seal of subscription, and stand resolute against the coming of the next Black Crusade. For the long war does not end, it only waits. Until the next broadcast, guard your thoughts, steady your faith, and remember, no fortress is impregnable, no empire is eternal, and when the talon closes, there will be no mercy.